Hey everyone, and welcome back to Daily Tuition. In this tutorial, we are going to learn JavaScript dynamic imports. Static imports is a standard way to import file at the top of your module using standard import syntax. Or if you have a default export, you would just say concat and then you call that concat function or object from the module. But this is not a problem. The problem is appear when you run your program and the file is not there, or the file is deleted, or the function returns an error message. And you also may have multiple JavaScript files that depends on each other. All the files that are depends will also return an error message. To solve this problem and to import code only when the file is available, we can use dynamic imports. Dynamic imports introduce a new function-like form of importing that unlocks a new capabilities compared to the static imports. Dynamic imports is just like a promise. Resolve will result a desired output and reject will return error message. Let's take a look at a very simple example to understand static and dynamic imports. Here, I'm going to open the Visual Studio Code and open an empty folder inside it. Dynamic import. Inside this, let me create three files: index.html and index.js. Let me first create index.html. I'm going to add here exclamation mark and create a simple HTML5 snippet, something like this, dynamic import. And then in the body here, I'm just going to say hello dynamic import. And at the last, I'm going to say script. And in the source attribute, I'm going to link my index.js file, something like this. And as you know, if you're using modules inside this index.js, you need to specify attribute here, type, which is going to be module. Let me save this file back to the index.js and let me close this index.html file. Now, as you know, the standard way to import a file in your JS is something like this. You first specify the import keyword, then specify the object or the function from, and then you specify your module name, something like this. So this is a standard way to import a file inside a JavaScript. Now let me create this module file. So inside my dynamic import, here I'm going to say module.js, and inside this module.js, I'm simply going to export a function. I'm going to say export function, and I'm going to name that function hello, say hello. And from this function, I'm just going to console.log a message, which is dynamic import. Save this file back to the index.js. And now I'm going to import this module inside this index.js. And instead of this concat, I'm going to say hello here. Now, as you know, this is not the default export. So we need to wrap this say hello in the curly braces, something like this. And now if I say here, say hello like this, when I save the changes back to the index.html and open the live server, we are going to have here a message dynamic imports. But now you can notice this is not a dynamic import. This is a static import. Let's convert this into dynamic import. So instead of this statement, I'm going to say here import. I'm going to call here import function. And inside this function, I'm going to first specify the path of the module. So I'm going to say module.js, and then I'm going to call here a promise then function, something like this, with object parameter. And inside this object parameter, we are going to have all the functions of the module.js file. So I can say here obj.say hello. So now I can remove this statement from here. Let me save this. And now when I reload the browser, you can see I'm going to have the same console message. And what if the path of this file is missing? For example, if I add here one more dot, so now this will return an error message. And you can see we're going to have here an error message, which is 404 file not found. Also, you can see we have here a catch promise. We can also catch this error inside a promise. So just down this, then we can call here catch and catch this error inside this catch method. So I can just simply say here console.log and then simply catch this error. Reload the browser, you can see we're going to have here an error message. So that's super easy, right? So if the file is not there, you can return an error message or do something with this file. The say hello function will only execute when the promise is resolved. Now, what if you have a file that depends on this module? For example, you have some code inside this module and we are using that code inside another JavaScript file. So if I create another file here with the name depends.js, and inside this depends.js, I'm simply going to export a function like this. I'm going to name the function conditional, and inside this function, I'm going to just console.log dynamic conditional import string. Let me save this file and back to the index.js. So if you want to import this file statically, you can just simply uncomment this statement, and instead of this module, you can just simply specify here depends.js, and from the depends you need conditional function, something like this, and you call that function right here. But you can notice this is not the right way to import this depends file, because we are using here static import. Instead of doing this, we can just simply import this depends file inside this then function. So here I'm going to get rid of this statement, and I can just simply say here import in the function, something like this. I'm going to call here depends.js, and then I'm going to call here function, the parameter names, and then call functions dot conditional, something like this. So this is the right way to import a statement inside another import statement. Let me remove this dot from here, back to the project, and you can see we have two console messages. So now we first get dynamic import, and then we get dynamic conditional import. So you can notice the depend file, it depends on the module. That's easy, right? Now keep in mind, you don't have to put import statement inside the if block. For example, if I add here if statement, and if I say if we have say hello function, then execute this if block and import a file. If I do that, back to the project and reload it, you can see we have an error message here. File path is incorrect. This is because the import and exports aim to provide a backbone for the code structure. So instead of using any block, you can just simply use promise that resolve into a module object that contains all its export. So instead of this block, we can just simply import any file using the import promises. Now, what if you have two functions inside this module? Let's suppose that you have concat function inside this module. You can call this concat function inside your index with this object. You can just simply call here object and the concat function. But you can notice this doesn't make sense to add 10 lines of code to import only 1 or 2 files. So instead of using this syntax to import a file inside your JavaScript, you can use async await. So I'm going to just get rid of this statement, and instead of writing 10 lines of code to import only a single file, you can just say here let object. In this object, we are destructuring the properties of the module. So I'm going to say here object is equal to await, and then we are going to import the file. So the file name is module.js. So we pass here module.js, something like this. And from this module, we are going to export two functions, say hello and concat. So we're going to destructure it inside this object, something like this. So you can notice only with a single line of code, you can use dynamic import syntax. So now if you want to execute this say hello, then you can call that say hello here. And if you want to call concat, you can also call that here. When you save the changes, you can see you're going to have both that functions here. But what if one of your function is a default function? For example, you can notice inside this module, we use here export to both these functions. But let's suppose that we use here default export. So if I add here default export to this concat, save the changes, back to the project, and then we are going to get an error message. Concat is not a function. This is because we use here a default export. This is because concat is now not just a export function. Instead, it is a default export from this file. So to get this concat from this module, you can just simply create here an object, something like this, and then you call both these functions with this object. And to call the concat, you just have to specify object.default. And as you can see, we have the console message here. So the default is going to call the default function of the module. Now there is one more way to do the same thing. Instead of this object, we can use destructuring to call the default function. So instead of this object, we can call here destructure object, and then I'm going to say here default colon and then the function name, which is concat. And if I want to call this function, I can just simply call here concat and specify parentheses. And now you can see we have the concat function here. That's easy, right? Now what if I specify different name to this concat function? If I specify here concatenation, and if I call this function right here, I'm going to get the same result. This is because we are using here a default function and then we specify the name to that function, concatenation. So from this file, we are going to import the default function, and in this file, I'm going to name that function concatenation instead of just concat. You can specify any name to this default function. That's upon you. You can choose any way you like. Now, if the imported module exports default and multiple named exports, then you can access all these components using single destructuring. So if you wanted to access this say hello as well, then you can simply pass here comma and then specify here say hello. And now you can call here your function say hello. And you can see you have say hello function here. So with just one line of code, you can use dynamic import. Now, as you all know, inside your index.html, if you're using modules, you need to pass type module to the script. You need to add this attribute if you're using import statements inside your JavaScript. The dynamic imports work with regular script as well. They don't require any type module attribute. You just have to wrap your await code inside a sync function. Let me show you. Let me get rid of this statement. I'm going to get rid of this attribute right from this script. Save this file. If I back to my project, I'm going to get an error message because await is only valid in the sync function. This is because we don't have here a type module attribute. So to use this await, we need to add a sync function. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to call here object load module, and then I'm going to wrap this function inside a function. So I'm going to say async. I'm going to create anonymous function here, something like this, and then pass here await import. And then I can simply call here load modules dot then object, and with this object I can simply call object dot say hello. Save the changes, and now you can see we have the say hello console message here. Or if you just want to add a single function, you can just call here dot say hello, something like this. So now inside this load module, you have the say hello function. Let me save the changes. You can see we have the same result. So inside this load module variable, we have this say hello. And if I want to call here a default function, I can just simply call here default. You can see. So next time when you import a file, consider the dynamic import. If you find anything useful, make sure to press the like button, share this video with your friends, subscribe for more latest videos. That is all for now. I will see you in the next one.